Hi everyone, and welcome to the Module 10 lecture guide video. In this video we're going to be looking at two main ideas. The first one being association and causation, so that's these first two keywords. And the second big idea, the idea of a random assignment. So for Unit 3 we are going to be moving into considering two variables. So Units 1 and 2 we only ever dealt with one proportion or one mean. But in this unit we're going to be looking at two variables. And so we're going to be spending our time focusing a good bit on two quantitative variables, two means, and kind of trying to look at things like that. But a lot of what we'll talk about you can extend to two proportions and do lots of different cool stuff. So these are the two big things: association, causation, random assignment. And they're connected to each other. But we'll see kind of exactly what these mean in just a bit. So let's start association. Let's go to the key terms and start there. So association, and we could zoom in a little bit more here. Association is two variables are associated if knowing the value of one can tell you about the value of other. So the thing I like to do is I just think the word connected. So when I see the word association between two variables, I think connected. So two variables are connected together. And often you're just going to try to show that or look at that or see that using some kind of graphical illustration. So we are going to be doing lots of scatter plots. That'll be our main way of viewing data in this unit. And if you have a scatter plot and you do something like try to connect the points, connect the data, we won't always do something like this because there will be lots of points and they don't fit a perfect line or such a nice line. But you'll put the points down on your scatter plot, you'll look at this and say, can I see a pattern? And if you can see a pattern, then that means there's an association between the variables. In this case, we've got the number of pirates on the x-axis right here, and then over here we've got the global average temperature. And so this is a little bit weird the way that this is structured because they put a decreasing number this way. But it looks like as the number of pirates decreases, the global average temperature seems to increase. And so this is a pattern. This is an association between the two variables. So the next thing I think you think about is, okay, two things are connected, so does that mean one's causing the other? And that's the next version, or the next word, is causation. Two variables have a causal relationship if they are associated, so there's got to be a pattern between them, just like this. So there's got to be a pattern between them, a connection, and the connection you see between the two, well, that connection is caused by one of the variables. So this connection here, you can say, okay, the number of pirates is causing the temperature to change. If you can say that, you've got causation. If you can't say that, you say, okay, well, I know the variables are connected, I just don't know how. And so that will be one of our goals in this section, is to learn about when you can say one variable is causing a change in the other and when you can't. So that's really the goal of this section, is to talk through that. All right? And so how do we define a lot of these things? How do we talk about them? The first thing we have to do is talk about, well, what can kind of go wrong in that situation? You've got two variables, they're connected. Here in the diagram, you've got A and B, there's a connection between them, an association. So you see that there's a connection. They're obviously doing similar things together or doing opposite things. That's still a pattern. So our brains want to go, okay, they're causing, one's causing. But in the case of a confounding variable, it's possible that there's this third variable we'll call C here that's lurking in the background you might not be thinking about. And that third variable is actually the root cause of the changes in A and B. And so what we're going to want to do is think about, if we've got two variables, they're connected, A and B, what are the possible other variables we're not considering that could cause this connection? That's an important thing. So what could be in the background that causes two things to be connected in such a way that actually A and B are not causing changes in each other at all? It's really that they're both just connected to this third variable C. Okay, so that's a confounding variable. So our goal is going to be, let's get rid of all the confounding variables. That's going to be our best way to try to say A causes B or B causes A, is if we can rule out all of these confounding variables. All right, so how in the world do we do that, right? How do we rule out confounding variables? Well, first thing we have to do is we've got to set up variable names for these things, so our A and B, all right? Oftentimes, what you'll see when you have two variables is you've got a response variable, the one that looks like it's the one that's changing based on something else, and the explanatory variable, the variable we believe is explaining the change in something. So you see the word explain almost in here, that's your connection. Explanatory variable, that's the one that's explaining the change. It's the cause of the relationship, we think. The response will be, what is the effect? So when you think cause and effect, if that's a little easier, you're thinking explanatory response. So just because we pick these two out in a situation doesn't mean we've proved there's cause and effect. But if you have a cause and effect relationship, you'd have explanatory variable, response variable. So that's the connection you can try to make in your head, is explanatory is like your cause variable, response is like your effect variable. It's the one that gets changed. This is the one that does the changing. So there are two types of studies we're going to look at in this class. So let's zoom in a little bit here. There's observational studies and experiments. So these two right here. Let's actually provide some space here so we can just focus on this. So an observational study is one in which the values of the explanatory variable, the variable we're thinking that might be causing, right? That variable, we simply observe them. So we as the researchers have no control over what observational unit in your study, what value of the explanatory variable they get. Okay, so this is the case a lot of the times when you do a survey. Think about a survey. You go up to someone, you ask them some information. Are you controlling any of the answers they give you? If it's an observational study, you're not. You go up to them and you ask them, what's your political party? What's your height? What's your weight? What's your age? All of these different things. You are observing those. You are not controlling them in any way. So because you can't control any of those variables as the researcher, this is an observational study. All right? So it's going to be very difficult for you to claim that their height or their age or anything causes something else to happen, because you've got no control over that variable. On the other hand, what you'll see a lot in the scientific fields is experiments. And an experiment is a study in which the researchers get to take each subject or observational unit, the way that we have been talking about these things, and you get to assign them to what are called treatment groups. So the idea here is there is an explanatory variable. And a lot of the times the way you can think of this is as a drug. So maybe you want to learn, how does this drug affect people? Or side effects, or whatever you want. Well, what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to give some people the drug and some people I'm not going to give the drug. That's the explanatory variable, drug versus no drug. Right? You want to know if the people in the group with the drug do better. Well, as the experimenter, you get to say, okay, here's my sample of people. I'm going to take some of you and put you into the drug group and some of you not. You are controlling who gets the drug, what group they're in. That's an experiment. You get to take the people and assign them into a group, and each group has a different value of the explanatory variable. So you're in control of it. So you have a much better ability to try to link that variable to some results. And we're going to talk about in just a little bit how we do that to the best of our ability. All right, so the goal at this point is we're talking experiments. We're taking our sample and we're dividing our sample up to get different values of the explanatory variable. All right, we want to tweak that. We want to tweak what you get for the explanatory, and then we want to look and say, what happened? And if we're trying to measure your whether you got over a disease or a sickness, or maybe we're looking at if you lost weight. We say, okay, how much weight did you lose? And then we might compare that to a group who didn't take the pill or was on a different exercise treatment, and we would look at them. Okay, what did you do? And then we can compare the groups. If there are no other confounding variables, the only difference between the two groups is one group got the pill, one group didn't. If that's the only difference between the groups, and you can tell that the group with the drug did better, then we can go, yes, cause and effect. The drug caused a change. So that's a big if, right? How can we actually say, yep, there's no difference between the groups? Well, if you go do the weekly activity, I'm going to set you up in a scenario where you're going to look at some information and you're going to try to separate the groups out so that each group is the same height, the same number of credits taken, and you're going to go through this list and try to make them all the same. What you're going to find in that is that it's incredibly hard to try to do that. And here's the kicker. Even if you're successful at perfectly separating the groups so that they're, same average height, same number of credits taken, the same proportion who have all of those I said on there. What about other things we're not thinking about? What if something you didn't think about is affecting the results of your experiment, and you didn't even think to try to balance your groups on that? And it just so happens that one of your groups, right, is a lot older, and oops, I forgot to make sure that my groups are the same age on average. Well, so that's part of the problem. Confounding variables come in many shapes and sizes. Confounding variables could be ones you're thinking about. Ooh, I got to make sure that doesn't happen. Or it could be ones you couldn't even think of or you didn't even think of. So it might seem kind of hopeless for us to do this idea, the separating of the groups. But there is something that we can do, and that something is called random assignment. Very important. So let me zoom out a little because this is a longer one. A random assignment, what is this? Well, it's an experimental design. So you're in an experiment, and what do? We say, okay, here are my subjects, right? Here's my sample. I'm going to take my sample, and if there are two groups as an example, just keep thinking. Pill group, no pill group, or placebo. So you've got two groups in your head. All right, if I'm doing random assignment, instead of me trying to take each person and go, ooh, which group should you go in? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, hey, computer, why don't you randomly put the people into the two groups? And it's very similar, this idea, to what we talked about last unit in the sampling. So remember how last unit, what did we talk about? We said, okay, we've got this big population, and how do I make sure I equally represent every group the right way? Well, the way I did that was I randomly sampled from the population. And that did a really good job making sure that each group that I was interested in the population, they had about the right proportion representation in my sample. So that was Unit 2, random sampling from the population. This is a little different. Once I have my sample, I then say, okay, people, I've got you. Now I'm going to take you and I'm going to break you up into groups randomly. If I do that, and I do it I actually perfectly randomly break them up, then what I can do is I can say, if there's a real difference between the groups, it's because of the explanatory variable. If you randomly assign, this is very important, if you randomly assign, then we are confident that any difference you find, statistically significant difference, will be because of the explanatory variable difference. That's when we can do cause and effect. So we need random assignment to say cause and effect. So when you read something that says, new study finds chocolate, blah, 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 you have to go and look at that and say, did they do random assignment? Did they only have chocolate be the difference between two groups in their measurements and do random assignment? There's some other stuff that we should be thinking about too that affects this. But just on the base, random assignment is definitely something we want to see. All right, let's look at example 1. So example 1 is talking about an association between ice cream consumption in New York City and the murder rate. So what we've seen, and this is something you can look up, I included one source, but you can find many sources on this, and this doesn't just happen in New York City, this is in lots of places, is that in the summer months, when people are eating more ice cream, there often are also a larger number of murders in the area. And so because of that, because when ice cream consumption, or you could just think sales if you want to think like that, when the ice cream consumption, sales, however you want to think of it, goes up, murder rates also are going up, and they do it together. That is called an association. The two variables are changing and in a way that makes it seem like they're connected. So, ice cream rates going up, murder rates going up. What's going on? Is one of these causing the other, or is there something behind the scenes? So, right here we have that question. Do we believe that one of the variables is causing the change in the other? If so, we would say one of these two things, something like this. The more ice cream you eat, the more likely you are to commit murder. That's one direction. Ice cream sales go up, causes murder. Somehow eating ice cream is causing people to want to murder more. Or, on the other hand, people who commit murder, or if you commit more murders, you're more likely to eat ice cream, or you're going to eat more ice cream. So for some reason, people being murdered is causing people to eat more ice cream. If both of those sound ridiculous to you, they should. That tells you, something else is going on here. There's a confounding variable. And if you're at that point, then that's where we need to start thinking. What else could be happening right now so that this one variable I can't see, that changes, and that change will increase ice cream sales while also increasing murder rates? What could be changing in the background that does that? So think about that for a minute, see if you can figure it out. And we're going to go down, so you can see that in the source too. So one possible confounding variable that's explored in that source and in many other places is temperature. So let's think about this. What happens when the temperature goes up? Well, if you're in New York City, the temperature goes up. Ooh, it's getting warmer. I'm more likely to buy ice cream. Okay, so temperature goes up, more ice cream is eaten. Well, what else? Temperature goes up, more people are outside. There's a couple other things you can think about from that source. But it also seems to happen that as you get into the summer months where the temperature's going up, more murders are happening. So let's recap that. Temperature goes up, ice cream goes up. Temperature goes up, murder rate goes up. Think about this for a second. Those two things I just said, they didn't reference each other at all. Ice cream consumption and murder rate were not referencing the other variable. They were completely not looking at the other variable. When I'm talking about ice cream going up here in this first sentence, I don't see murder rate at all. When I'm talking about the murder rate going up, I don't see ice cream at all. So even though the variables seem to be connected, we're seeing that this third variable actually shows that they're not connected. They're not impacting each other. Okay, so then what's the third piece of this we have to just be thinking through? Temperature impacts ice cream consumption. That's this. Temperature impacts murder rate. Awesome. What's the third thing we have to check? That this connection between this causal relationship between temperature and ice cream, temperature and murder rate, does that actually do the same thing in the sense of making the association also appear? So what was our association? Ice cream goes up, murder rate goes up. So they both increase together. Well, what is temperature doing? Ooh, it's making them both increase? Okay, that works. So the temperature variable has to also make the same change that you see in just the association here. So it's, okay, is there a causal relationship between? Got it. Does that relationship we just explained fit with the association we saw? Yep, it does. Then we've got it. That's it. We find a lurking variable hiding in the background, and that variable seems to cause the change in the other two that we initially saw. All right, so that's a confounding variable, and in this case, temperature is the one that we believe is causing it. Okay, let's look at example 2. So in this one, a researcher wants to study the effects of birth order on personality. So this is something you can find that people have attempted to study. And so we have to explain why this study could not be conducted as a randomized experiment. So my claim here is that this researcher cannot do a randomized experiment here. So we've got to think about this, right? We want to understand how birth order affects personality. What does that mean? It means birth order is my explanatory variable. It's explaining. That's what the researcher thinks. It's going to explain personality. So once I'm at that point saying, okay, birth order is the explanatory variable, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, how can I show that there's a cause and effect relationship between birth order and personality? Well, I have to do a randomized experiment. I've got to get a sample and I've got to do random assignment. But wait, that means you're telling me I've got to get people, okay, with siblings, and I have to randomly assign each of those people a birth order. How do you randomly assign a person a birth order? Well, you can't, because that person can't be assigned a birth order. So that person that is in your sample, you as the researcher have no control over their birth order. Because of that, this cannot be a randomized experiment, and at best only an observational study. And so all we can do is see connections between birth order and personality. But in terms of proving a cause and effect relationship, we can't quite do that because this is not a randomized experiment. So that is why it's very difficult for many things to actually try to prove cause and effect. Because if you can't actually control birth order, then you can't actually knock out all the possible confounding variables. Even if you're thinking to me right now, hey, Mr. B, I can't think of any confounding variables that would mess up birth order being cause and effect with personality. Well, just because you can't think of it doesn't mean someone else can't. Just because I can't doesn't mean someone else can't. So because that's a possibility, we always have to be thinking that could be messing up our results. So just have to think about that. The only guarantee we have for cause and effect is this idea of randomizing our experiment.